So I'm a PhD student in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness, and over the past few years, I've had the chance to study Alfred North Whitehead extensively. An obvious initial obstacle, which I think many people have struggled with, was the obscurity of Whitehead's language. It took a lot of patience and time to break through to some kind of understanding of what he was actually saying. And this is a common problem with many students of Whitehead. But once that epiphany occurred, I found him to be a real genius and was able to see connections to many themes in modern neuroscience, psychology, and physics. As I read and contemplated Whitehead's work, I felt the urge to make visual art out of his ideas. It felt satisfying to give some kind of a physical, artistic form to Whitehead's very abstract ideas. So in this presentation, I would like to present some of these images I made and relate them to Whitehead's ideas, and also to emphasize the importance of the creative and artistic practices for learning. It's no wonder that Whitehead's writing may appear vague, because he himself was a big fan of vagueness. In his book, Modes of Thought, he stressed that not everything in our experience is clear and tidy. Only that which is conscious possesses some form of clarity, but the remaining and dominant mass of experience takes place below the threshold of consciousness as a kind of subconscious prehension of information. To illustrate this, I use a phenomenological example. Here's a sample of our visual field when we're looking at some flowers. In the center, we have the portion that is sharp and crystal clear. Around it is a layer less focused, and on the periphery, whatever is at the edges of our visual field generally escapes our awareness. There's almost nothing formed there, just a kind of diffuse energy which we generally don't pay attention to. Therefore, even within our own very visual field, we have zones of clarity and zones of blindness. Whitehead defined positive prehensions, which are data accepted into a clear percept, and negative prehensions, which are not. And the zones of positive and negative prehensions seem to diffuse into each other as on a spectrum. Another metaphor that came to mind regarding prehension is video game or virtual reality pixelation. As the player turns every which way, the dust-like pixels on the edges of the playing field flicker to catch up to the player's movement and then merge together into the appearance of one solid spatiotemporal view at the center. The center is where clear form emerges, while the periphery is steeped with the yet unactualized potentials. Whitehead also noticed that within our bodies there is a vague mass of obscure primary feelings, which may be more like these individual pixels that don't really reach consciousness yet in a clear unified percept. What I really like about Whitehead is that he persistently emphasized the importance of electromagnetism in our universe. In my thesis, I focus on electromagnetic theories of consciousness, so I find this important. In fact, for modern electromagnetic semi-field theory of consciousness, what might differentiate consciousness centered in our brains from the subconscious feelings of the body are different concentrations of electromagnetic energy. In the brain, there is a lot of it due to an immensely packed mass of firing neurons, which create a strong unified field. Meanwhile, in the body, these energies are more diffused throughout the tissues and not as concentrated. So this kind of electromagnetic coherence may be responsible for the difference between consciousness and the more subconscious forms of prehension. Now we come to Whitehead's key concept of concrescence, the merging of many into one, or the creation of one field, so to speak. According to Whitehead, each actual occasion is capable of prehending from many others. In this illustration, I attempted to equate metaphorically the actual occasion to a neuron. Whitehead used the term actual occasion in an abstract way, and many, like my professor Matthew Siegel, who is a Whiteheadian expert, believed that the term could be applied to many different aspects of reality on different scales, and not just microscopic entities. A neuron, for example, demonstrates well the idea of gathering or compressing various streams of information, and likewise passing it on to many others as well. It does this through the multiple dendrite and axon branches. On the scale of the whole brain, visual perception is a concressing nexus of neurons, and the formation of a visual scene is the concrescence of various objects into one subjectively experienced scene. For example, if you are sitting in your room, the couch, the bookcase, the carpet, and the curtains all get prehended and arranged accordingly within the visual field. The many objects concress into a subjective unity, and thus the actual occasion achieves satisfaction and a momentary subjectivity of the visual scene. In this last stage of concression, according to Whitehead, the subjective unity perishes into objective immortality. The way I envision this last perishing step is with a subjective unity of the scene that had just concressed, now transforming into a memory, an energetic trace. Concrescence may also take place not only at the level of whole scenes in the visual field, but individual objects as well. For example, since the 90s, the binding problem in neuroscience asked how is it that visual elements like color, shape, position, pattern, which may be processed in separate brain regions, still combine within one visual space into the full object. This process might be explained by a few examples of concrescence from modern consciousness studies. First, neural synchrony is the process in the brain where thousands to millions of neurons in different regions of the brain fire at the same time, forming coherent synchronized waves. In this diagram, you see the typical brain waves measured at different frequencies. Every time you see a little peak in the wave, this represents the synchronization of multiple neurons. So you see in the higher gamma and beta bands, there are many little peaks. These are the pulses of synchronized activity, or neuronal nexuses concressing around a mutual function, the many becoming one. And this neural synchrony is considered the prime indicator of consciousness being present in the brain. So concrescence literally equals consciousness in the brain's case. Secondly, according again to the electromagnetic theories of consciousness, there are photons being emitted in the whole electrical process of firing neurons. These photons merge together into the one unified electromagnetic field. The global brain field is dynamic and moves around the brain, and it can be observed with magnetoencephalography, with its kaleidoscopic patterns. On top of the concressing neurons, here there is a concrescence of energy, which creates the brain's unified electromagnetic field. Going back to the classic binding problem, it's interesting to look at these properties that are bound together within the object, like color, shape, orientation, position, etc. These are also what Whitehead would call eternal objects. Psychology might define them as something like basic perceptual gestalts or motifs, which are each distinguishable themselves, but are also able to be combined into a larger gestalt, which is the object itself. If we look at the level of physics, we see that photons possess this property of being able to merge into the same space. This diagram illustrates the two fundamental types of particles. Fermions on the left are particles of matter. Each one of these takes up its own portion of space. Bosons on the right are particles of energy. Photons are a type of boson. So you see you can keep packing photons into the same space, compressing them to create a merged field. This is again reminiscent of different eternal objects or visual properties combined within the object. This is another clue to why consciousness, especially visual consciousness, may have light or electromagnetism as a component. As someone who understood physics, Whitehead was trying to explain these archetypal properties of energy and light to us. He developed his own language because quantum physics was only emerging at that time, and the vocabulary that we have around it nowadays wasn't yet popularized. Nowadays, we might call the process of concrescence coherence or entanglement. Other relevant terms that Whitehead used were mutual immanence or mutual conformity of actual occasions. We have looked at binding or concrescence of properties in the spatial sense, but things in our perception also get bound and concress in the temporal sense. Consider, for example, watching a running cat. From the point of view of perception, the cat is an object in the space of the visual field. But just like the shifting kaleidoscopic magnetic patterns in the brain that we saw with MEG, here too, the image of the cat shifts and moves through time. If we compare each subjective moment of the visual field, each temporary visual image of the cat to an actual occasion, then each subsequent occasion prehends the one before it. Thus you get one smooth, continuous movement of the running cat. You might think of each moment or temporary image of the cat as superimposing on the one beside it. Thus, some form of the cat is preserved from one occasion to the next, but something new is also added with each new occasion. And this is how Whitehead described the dual character of each actual occasion, partially steeped and prehending from the past, and partially ingressing some new possibility. Do such temporary static images actually exist in our perception, however, or is this just another abstraction of overall process? After all, we don't actually see static snapshots of the cat. We see one smooth, fluid movement. And Whitehead himself admitted that the term actual occasion is just an abstraction. But in the end, everything is process, movement, vibration, and a wave. Nevertheless, abstractive units help us understand phenomena. Otherwise, there would be no clarity at all, and we would be living in one giant, hazy cloud of energy. There is, however, evidence from perceptual studies that temporary moments of these gestalt snapshots of reality do actually exist. One example comes from auditory perception. In a study in psychophysics, a metronome device was used. This is a mechanical device that is programmed to tick at a regular rate, like tick, 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 tick. What was found is that when these ticks were programmed super close together in time, something like 30 to 300 milliseconds, human perception couldn't differentiate between different ticks, but only perceived one tick. A kind of perceptual concrescence blended two adjacent ticks into one. As Whitehead explained, appearance and reality are two characters of the actual occasion, and they may differ from one another. So in this case, the reality is that these are multiple metronome ticks, but the perceived moment only contains one tick in appearance. There have also been found larger such groupings of the perceived moment, or temporal windows as they are called. Larger actual occasions, we might say. The next interval is 300 milliseconds to 3 seconds, and the one after that is above 3 seconds, at which point concrescence begins to take place cognitively and not just perceptually. The fact that these experiential moments or actual occasions may take up different intervals of time and thus occur at different scales supports Whitehead's vision of a textured rather than a smooth universe. One traditional way that science has envisioned the universe is with a block theory as a four-dimensional block, with time being the completely spatialized fourth dimension. In this sense, everything is static and predetermined. Compared to this, Whitehead's metaphysics is more like a bundle of blocks, an infinite number of them, where each one is composed of a unique set of properties and dimensions. The universe is not a huge stage or a total space-time on which events play out, but rather each one of these blocks or actual occasions represents its own individual and unique space-time. But perhaps even a block is not the best metaphor for an actual occasion, which is described by Whitehead in a more organic and processual manner. But the key idea here is that reality is not predetermined and evenly spaced like a mathematical grid, but it's more textured and variable. Reality also doesn't contain these actual occasions inside of it. Rather, actual occasions bundle or compress together to create what Whitehead called the extensive continuum, or the very fabric of the universe. If we picture this bundle of blocks as wood that is set on fire, we might understand how one concrescent energy ties together the many odd separates. I found this textured conception of reality very relevant to the study of synchronicity, for example. Each synchronicity is like a separate event or block composed of its own temporality and spatiality. And this is why events like synchronicities don't seem to fit in with the mass of the other more regular events that make up our lives. synchronistic events are really energy fields exhibiting their own separate spatiotemporal causality. Whitehead used a diagram like this in his publication called The Principle of Relativity with Applications to Physical Science. This diagram is known as a light cone, and it was first used by Einstein's teacher Hermann Minkowski. In his book, Whitehead equates this light cone to the actual occasion. So the red line in the middle indicates the now moment of the occasion. On the left, you see rays of light that had traveled from some distant location gathering into the now moment. So think, for example, how vision works. We gather light rays from as far away as millions of light years away when we look at stars. And this expanse of space traversed by light represents the physical pole of the actual occasion, the pole which has prehended the past. And this is why they say the stars we look at are actually what they looked like thousands of years ago, or however long it took for that light to travel towards us. Now, on the right side of the diagram is the mental pole, with the light rays now radiating outwards from the now moment. The mental pole is composed of virtual light and extends into the virtual space or possibility space. The mental pole ingresses possibilities. In this diagram of visual perception, we can basically see that the process of vision itself possesses the same poles as the actual occasion of the light cone. We have the physical pole or cone of light, rays traveling from the sun, illuminating some objects, and then reaching the eyes. And the mental pole, which is pictured as virtual light rays projecting from the eyes into some mysterious space, whether it is some kind of phenomenal space or even back again into physical space or the original object. So the mental pole is essentially our awareness or the mental representation of the object in our minds. Later in my paper, I take these and other ideas further towards explaining the more extrasensory forms of perception, like clairvoyance and precognition. In regular perception, you have a series of actual occasions that each prehend from each other, as is shown in the top row here. The bottom example shows a more extrasensory type of perception. And very briefly, the basic idea is that the two occasions simply differ in scale size. Remember that we discussed temporal windows or conscious moments that come in different lengths of time? So what happens in extrasensory perception is that the mental pole of the occasion of a short conscious moment prehends from the physical pole of the larger, more expansive actual occasion. Hence, one might see something like a vision mentally in one's mental pole, and after some time has passed, the event predicted by the vision takes place in the physical world or the physical pole of this larger occasion. The mental pole of the smaller occasion prehended a possibility from the larger occasion, in which this was already a kind of actuality. The larger occasion could essentially be something like the subjective moment of the awareness of nature or the environment. And here are all the various other illustrations from my paper in which I explain many other Whiteheadian terms. So to finish, I would just like to emphasize one more time that creating these pictures was a very helpful practice, aiding my own understanding of these complex metaphysics and allowing me to spot connections to modern science, psychology, and philosophy. I believe students, even in disciplines like science and philosophy, should be encouraged to implement embodied artistic practices of their choice to aid their education and comprehension. And these are all the references for the research I used in this presentation. Many thanks, and my full paper, Envisioning Whiteheadian Metaphysics, in 2 essays can be found on my website, juliayusupova.com, along with various other research. Thank you so much.